Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I'm a little bit late today, but once again, it's been a wild and wacky week here in your nation's capital. Let me start with a subject that I've been spending a lot of time on this week, which is the kind of crazy, unconstitutional efforts by this president to try to nationalize our elections. The Constitution is very clear that elections are the purview of the states and localities, yet Donald Trump wants to pick certain states, probably including Virginia, to say that the Republicans or the feds ought to take it over. That is counter to a fair process. I've gone from a year ago when people asked me about concerns about the 26 or 28 elections being interfered with by this administration. I thought it might have been a bit of a wild claim a year ago, but now I believe it is. I am concerned that this could be a very serious effort. And in Virginia, where we have not only midterms, we have primaries, we may even have a statewide referendum on redistricting, this is extraordinarily serious. And we have to have responsible people. Luckily, the majority leader, Senator Thune, stood up and said, no, you can't nationalize elections, Donald Trump. But this is unleashed. This plays entirely into what is the ongoing story of Trump's effort to try to relitigate one more time the 2020 election when there was an issuance of a search warrant to look at the voting machines in Georgia. Well, that is complicated by why in the heck was Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, down at that service of the search warrant. She has no role. She has no domestic criminal responsibilities. Her job is to look at foreign influence into our election. And if there was any claim of foreign influence, she obviously has broken her responsibility there because she's not notified her oversight committees, my Intelligence Committee in the House and the Senate. On top of that, what we're really seeing here is a return to Nixon-era policies. I know most of you are not old enough to have been around with Watergate, but this was a time when President Nixon and his political henchmen broke into the Democratic National Committee at Watergate Hotel, and then the cover-up ultimately led to Nixon's impeachment and removal from office. Well, we may be seeing the beginnings of the similar approach. Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, says that she was there at the request of the president. Well, the president of the United States is not supposed to be knowing about a search warrant before it's issued. This is the kind of stuff that's right out of the Nixon era. And all the reforms, including the formation of the Intelligence Committee, was to make sure that kind of activity didn't happen again. So if Gabbard was there because Trump said, hey, we're going to stick it to Georgia, that violates all of the reforms and rules that were put in place after the Watergate era. Now that he's changed his position 3 or 4 times, he said he didn't know why Gabbard was there last night. This morning he said she was there because Pam Bondi. But this is the kind of classic Keystone Cop screw-up. And when we're talking about our election security, this is not a laughing matter. On top of that, didn't get a lot of attention, but Director of National Intelligence acknowledged her office was also looking at voting machines in Puerto Rico, part of America. And there was no foreign connection. This is a Director of National Intelligence that's run amok, and either she is lying or the president's lying. Regardless, we've got to be laser focused, people of goodwill of both political parties, on protecting the integrity of our elections. And not only from foreign interference, but frankly now from a president who can't still accept the fact that he lost in 2020, and not unlike Richard Nixon, is going to do everything in his power to make sure he doesn't get beat again, at least his political party beat again, in the midterms. Much more to come on that. Another issue that obviously has captured the nation's attention, which is the activities of ICE in Minnesota, the killings of 2 Americans, and the need to rein in this, frankly, rogue department at this point. And while we've seen some cutback in troops and agents, and in Minneapolis, they still more than double the number of local police in the city. And remember, what's happening right now in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, could happen in Richmond, could happen in Norfolk, could happen in Roanoke, could happen in Fairfax County. If Trump directs this unregulated group of literally thousands of agents to descend on the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we've got to put reforms, common sense reforms in for ICE. Things like, hey, ICE agents, you ought to adhere to the same standards that other law enforcement, our state police, our local police, the FBI. You can't come be masked and unidentified everywhere you go. You got to turn on your body cameras. You can't have these roving patrols showing up and intimidating people and randomly knocking on doors. You need some level of warrant. You need to have basically the same rules apply to ICE that applies to most all of other law enforcement. And one area that's not gotten as much attention, but I think we should be enormously concerned, is that we now have information that ICE is using a series of new technology tools to literally identify American citizens, to look at, to go up to them and question their, they know who you are, they know where you live, they know your social media activities. This is a kind of Orwellian approach, and we are demanding, frankly, that ICE share with us how they are using, and DHS is using these new technology tools. We already saw that an American citizen in Minnesota had their global entry, which is a card you get to get through TSA faster. That a Minnesotan was applying for global entry and got it denied because that American citizen had the audacity to protest. Do we really want ICE knowing all this information? Do you really trust Kristi Noem to have all your personal information and then to extract retribution against you because she doesn't like what you're doing if you're using your First Amendment rights? So luckily, just as I was walking in, I got a response from and Tim Kaine and I both wrote to the IC Inspector General saying, this can't happen. And the Inspector General just got back to us literally as I was walking in to say they're going to investigate this. And if these tools are being used inappropriately, particularly on American citizens, that we'll put an end to it. So we've got to do that. On a slightly happier note, this week, along with my friend, the senator from North Dakota, Senator Kramer, we introduced a reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. The Export-Import Bank is the entity that helps American businesses, large businesses and small businesses, do a better job of exporting their products. In Virginia, it's helped about 80 companies over the last couple of years, about $800 million of exports. And boy, that's needed now because Trump tariffs are creaming small businesses that depend upon that export business to hit their bottom line. And what we've seen is China and other nations are dramatically increasing their export support because in more and more countries are stopping bringing in American exports because of the tariff wars. And the Export-Import Bank, which has been around for post-World War II, always bipartisan, it needs to be reauthorized. And Kevin Kramer and I are going to do all we can to make sure this tool that's helpful for big businesses and small businesses doesn't go away. Much more, but why don't I go ahead and turn it over, I think, to Catherine, and I'll go ahead and take your questions.
Our first question is from Jacob with Scripps News.
Hey, Senator, thank you so much for doing this call. Sorry, I'm walking inside someplace a little bit quieter. I wanted to ask, as we're talking about Director Gabbard and some of the controversies surrounding her, if you had anything to speak to the classified whistleblower complaints that's been reported on. Our understanding is that at least portions of a redacted version of it have been shared with the Gang of Eight. Is there anything you can tell us as to your understanding of the veracity of the claim, sort of next steps, and what we should be looking for there.
First of all, I'm a little old-fashioned. I actually think classified information should be kept classified. So I can't comment on the substance of the claim. I do believe it was so heavily redacted, it's hard to sort out. And I take the claim seriously, and we've got to get more information. But what I can tell you is one more example of Director Gabbard not following the law. This complaint was brought forward in May of last year. All of the appropriate hoops were jumped through by, I believe, June 9th. That complaint should have been relayed to Congress at that point. 21 days after a complaint is issued, it needs to come to Congress, and the complainant ought to be able to have an ability to tell us directly. We didn't even know the complaint existed until November. And let me be clear, this is not just the Democrats' concern. The Gang of Eight, the Speaker of the House, the Director of the Majority Leader of the Senate, we've all asked, we got to see this. Why didn't she follow the law? Why didn't we get the complaint on a timely basis? And then, in testimony just yesterday, we have somebody is lying because her lawyer said he told Gabbard about the complaint and the legal requirements back in June. She says she didn't know legal requirements. Well, she testified when she got the job that she would honor the laws around whistleblower complaints. So her incompetence, or the incompetence of her lawyer, means that this stinks to high heaven. And why did they sit on this complaint literally for almost 9 months, or at least 6 months, before even notifying Congress, and then redacting it so much that we can't ascertain the veracity of it or not? This is a theme, whether it's about whistleblower complaints, whether it's about the integrity of our electoral system. This is a crowd that thinks that laws do not apply to them, that rules don't apply to them, and there's nothing partisan about this. We all who are concerned about the integrity of our political system and the safety of not having foreign influence on individuals close to the administration, we need to be vigilant.
Our next question is from Tom with Fox 5. Tom, are you there? Okay, our next question is from Allison with ABC 13.
Hey, Senator, thanks for speaking with us today. My question for you, I know you've expressed concern about the potential for President Trump to send ICE agents to polling places to, intimidate voters in this year's election. And we've really seen the question asked over and over again on social media. If you want to talk to me a little bit about why you believe that would really intimidate a legal voter.
Well, you send ICE to polling stations, and you're intimidating American citizens who vote. They may have a member of their family that is not fully documented. If ICE has got information, all your personal information, and you may have protested at some point against the policies of this administration, and you're going to vote, and an ICE agent comes up and says, well, I saw you protested in Norfolk. I saw you protested against a president's policy in Richmond. Why are you doing that? Why are you voting? If you don't think that would scare American citizens, registered voters, or at least put a pause in their voting, I don't think you're being realistic. I know in Virginia right now, there are literally, particularly, thousands of Latino Virginians who are American citizens who are afraid to go to school, who are afraid to go to work, and I sure as heck believe they would be afraid to vote, even though they're perfectly legal, if ICE agents who are racial profiling, and that is one of the reforms that need to be taking place, are singling out every Hispanic-looking individual. And on top of that, if ICE has access to all your personal information? Do you really want to run that gauntlet as an American citizen, regardless of your heritage or background? If they said, well, my gosh, you may have missed a parking ticket at some point. ICE has that information. Are you going to vote? Or are you going to simply say, you know what, I think I'm going to sit this one out? This is an effort to intimidate voters. This is an effort to undermine democracy. And you take that combined with the efforts around seizing voting machines and voting files in Georgia. Anyone that doesn't understand this is a direct threat to free and fair elections. And the whole notional idea that on top of that Trump is saying we ought to put Republicans and nationalize elections, a basic hallmark of conservative Republican orthodoxy for years has been we don't want the feds in our local elections. Well, in a world where up is down and down is up and Donald Trump is president, that's all been turned on its head. And I'd be curious about those who are asking what registered Americans would have. Do they really want the feds controlling our local elections and looking at whether you've got a parking ticket or not and then trying to scare away you from the election voting machines? That's not the way our country operates.
Our next question is from Chris with Wavy.
Hi, Senator. Appreciate you taking the time today. Wanted to get your reaction and comment on the Governor Spanberger order yesterday that terminates relationships between state law enforcement and ICE. I know that you mentioned a little bit in your opening remarks, but wanted to zero in on that issue itself.
I think in light of ICE's behavior in Minnesota and Minneapolis, in light of the fact that we've got no reforms in place, I think the governor took the right action. I'm not sure whether, my understanding is that there's still, if you've got somebody that's been convicted of a felony and they are an undocumented person, that there could still be some sharing, I believe, but I'm not, I know it's 287G, I think it's but I think until there are reforms in place, I understand why she took that action. And I also tell you, my conversations with law enforcement have been that they're concerned about this, because if you lose the trust of your community, your main job as the local police is to keep the community safe. If your community members believe that you're working with a rogue agency, they can't do their job. And the best evidence of that is look at the Minneapolis police chief, look at the International Association of Police Chiefs, who are all saying ICE has gone way too far. And regular law enforcement can't be carried out because they can't respond to all the calls they're getting if ICE agents are showing up unwarranted at people's houses and somebody calls your local cops to come. And the idea of losing the faith of the community is really important. So I think the governor made the right call.
Our next question is from Madison with 13 News Now.
Hi, Senator Warner. I wanted to talk about the federal funding for community projects across Virginia that was passed with you alongside Senator Kaine, namely because we're here in the Hampton Roads area and we've got a lot of the infrastructure here and also military bases. And some of that funding is going to places like Naval Station Norfolk and Little Creek Fort Story. We were just looking to see how you hope that money impacts the infrastructure and also different military bases and projects here.
We've got to keep up our military infrastructure in Hampton Roads. There's actually some of these infrastructure projects are around housing for our military. Some are actually around additional daycare centers, as well as making sure we've got appropriate money on ship repair. Tim Kaine and I work arm in arm to make sure that we can get these funds for Virginia. It's one of the reasons why we both supported making sure that we don't hold those Department of Defense funds hostage while we have this debate about DHS. And if we had not passed the ability to get DOD, and frankly, a lot of other projects that we were funded in healthcare and community development, if they were held hostage and we hadn't passed and we kept in a government shutdown, that would slow those projects coming to Hampton Roads. Now, if we're going to have a fight, it's going to be only about DHS, and there are important issues in DHS, TSA, Coast Guard. We've got a major presence of the Coast Guard in Hampton Roads, but it is much more isolated. I would also say one of the things that really concerns me is this administration is randomly holding back funds on projects they don't like. In testimony with the Treasury Secretary today, one of the reasons I supported him for his confirmation is there is a bipartisan effort around what's called Community Development Financial Institutions, CDFIs. They help underserved communities get access to capital. It's the law. There's $325 million that was supposed to go out in the last fiscal year. The money's still not out. OMB is violating the law. And I said to the Treasury Secretary, you got to call the director of OMB and get that money released. But this picking and choosing of which projects to fund, regardless of the law, again, we've never seen activity like this. But in terms of DOD, Tim and I worked well with the whole delegation, and this is going to improve the quality of life for our service members in Hampton Roads. It's going to make sure that we stay on the cutting edge in terms of particularly around ship repair, where we've got a lot more to do, as well as making sure that we continue to beef up those installations.
Our next question is from Nicholas with Falls Church News Press. Nicholas, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to return to Tom.
Thank you. Senator Warner, going back to the Gabbard whistleblower situation, this statement from an official saying this was to release this information would cause grave damage to national security. What could that possibly mean? And if you're an oversight group in the Senate, how can they redact information from you? And what can be done to remedy that? And finally, do you think that what is in this report is something the American public should be really concerned about?
Well, Nick, because I don't know all the details because it was so heavily redacted, I can't make that judgment yet. But the idea that this was sensitive and somehow shouldn't be released, well, that was why the Gang of Eight was set up. That's why the Intelligence Committee oversight was set up. This is an outrageous false claim from the administration. They don't get to pick and choose what they share with Congress. And again, to make sure that if it is terribly sensitive, it's only shared with the Gang of Eight members who have never leaked. It's outrageous, this claim. Their claim is without merit, and they don't know the law. And they've clearly violated the law already. It's supposed to be 21 days, and you got to get it over to Congress. We didn't even know the complaint existed for 4 or 5 months, and then it took bipartisan efforts from November, and it was still February before we saw it. I know this is kind of esoteric, but this is how democracies are destroyed. And again, remember, whether we're talking about the whistleblower complaint, whether we're talking about, the questions about whether the president should know about a criminal investigation before it happens, particularly if it's politically motivated, when we're talking about a DNI running rogue, looking at voting machines in Puerto Rico and now in Georgia where she has no right, we set up a whole set of rules, and you're old enough to remember this, Nick, post-Nixon Watergate, to make sure this kind of stuff doesn't happen. This crowd is ignoring the rules, ignoring the regulations, and storming ahead. And until Americans of good faith in both parties step up and say no more, I'm not sure where this ends, other than potentially a corrupted election process in 2026, which I can't even believe I'm saying those words. But a year ago, I didn't believe they'd go this far. Now I believe this president will do anything not to suffer another defeat like he suffered in 2020. Listen, he won in 2024. He's still obsessed about 2020. It looks, because of his policies, that Americans, nothing's gotten more affordable. We're seeing health care taken away from millions of Americans. We see an administration which makes our nation less safe around the world as he gallivants around and goes against our allies The American people are going to say, we don't want that. And if the Trump administration tries to corrupt the process, if we don't step up, then I don't want to overstate, but the very future of our democracy could be upstate.
And now we'll go
What
to Tom
recourse
with
is the
Fox
gang?
5.
We're looking at
Senator,
What
thanks for
recourse
doing
is the
this.
gang?
Sorry for my
Sorry.
absence a moment ago. The mute button looks a lot like the end call button sometimes. You were talking about money and where they are spending money in the administration. And I know you're not on Homeland Security, but there was a report that came out of Homeland Security Committee today by Democrats that showed that the deployment of the National Guard in D.C. has cost taxpayers more than $330 million. And the report says they can't point to any measurable results from any of this. Just on a gut level, Senator, because you're so involved regionally here, what do you make of this? I mean, that $330 million sounds like a lot of money.
Tom, it is a lot of money. And the federal government should pick up that cost. Just as I hope Minnesota sends ICE a bill for the cost that it's cost Minneapolis. And in Minneapolis, because it's been so over the top, it's not only direct cost to their police departments and other public services, but who's going to absorb all the economic costs that have taken place with all the restaurants and businesses that don't have their workers. And here in D.C., if it's $350 million that D.C. should get reimbursed. And remember, Tom, that's coming on top of another effort by the House Republicans to cheat D.C. out of another $650 million in terms of D.C.'s right to basically say, we don't want to abide by the federal income tax changes. States have that right. I know Virginia at times has not gone along. Other states have not gone along. And now you've got this, anti-D.C. House Republicans taking another fiscal whack at D.C. So whether it's the National Guard cost, whether this effort to cut out the $650 million of tax agreement with the federal system, whether it was the House Republicans taking $1 billion away arbitrarily from the district. And not only is it not fair to the district, but that also puts a hole in our whole regional economy. It's not good for D.C. It's also not good for Virginia and Maryland.
Our final question is from Amy with Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. I usually ask about the Puppy Bowl on Super Bowl weekend, but I'm switching it up this year because a group of Buddhist monks is making their way from Texas through Virginia, and they plan to end their journey in D.C. next week. What kind of impacts have you seen this walk have on the Commonwealth, and do you plan to see them when they're in town?
Well, I'd like to see them when they're in town. I mean, I hadn't heard much about it until they got to Virginia, and I saw that they had huge turnout in Richmond, and I think even the governor met and greeted them. The idea that we all ought to take as part of Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist religion, take a deep breath and maybe be a little more centered as a human being. I think that's something we all ought to be able to agree on, whether you're a Trump supporter or a Trump decliner, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, a libertarian, even a vegetarian, ought to be able to say, taking a moment to reflect and center yourself a little bit, which is part of Buddhist philosophy, is probably a step in the right direction, and maybe something, if we all took a few minutes for that self-reflection and got off our screens, that might be a positive step as well. So thanks, Amy.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have today.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.